Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. We start this week with the possible deal on immigration and border security that President Trump made during a dinner with Democrats Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, and Nancy Pelosi, the House Minority Leader. Now, reports say that the president wants to allow the 800,000 or so Dreamers to stay in the country without giving them amnesty or legal status, and in return, he's asking congressional Democrats to agree to beefed up border security, which Schumer and Pelosi have also agreed to. Now, while a border wall isn't part of this agreement, the president says that he still wants it built, but that will come later. So, Jay, I mean, I don't know if you call it exactly a stunning development or reversal, but what are your thoughts on this?
Well, a couple things. First, I think the president's instincts on the one hand are correct in that, you know, the play here for Democrats is to say we trade DACA for increased border security. My concern would be, is Trump going to get rolled on this deal? Where I think he sort of did last time on the budget and debt ceiling deal. You know, for example, at this point, to call it a deal might be a little premature.
An understanding,
so I
maybe.
Think we'd have to wait and see. I'm sorry?
I'm saying maybe we'd call it like an understanding, I guess, something like that.
Yeah,
huh?
Or, you know, discussion points or a agreement in principle, perhaps. But my concern would be that when the legislation is actually introduced and ready to go, do the Democrats at that point say, well, no, this isn't enough. This isn't the deal we made. And then sort of pull the plug. And my reasons for saying that are a couple, because I think if you look at where we are just structurally, and thinking again in Machiavellian sort of terms, what's in it for the Democrats to cut a deal on DACA and immigration? I think if I'm Chuck or Nancy, I would much rather have that as an election issue than have the issue out there that you capitulated to Donald Trump in any way, shape, or form. So that's what I'm concerned about. I just don't know that it's actually going to, when the rubber is going to actually hit the road.
But I wonder if you're maybe getting a little bit ahead of yourself. I mean, I see what you're saying, but I mean, to me, this actually is a positive development, because to me, this is how legislation is supposed to work. You know, the Democrats want something, the Republicans want something else, and everyone gives and gets a little bit. And so, sure, the final deal might be a little less less of what anyone wants, because that's how, legislation in a divided system, works. But everyone gets a little something. And to me, that's what we want to get. And again, you're right. The devil's in the details, but hey, I think there's a good case to be made for some beefed up border security. And I also think there's a very good case to be made for giving these Dreamers a way to stay in the country. And so if we can do that, I think that's one of the few positive signs I would have seen between congressional executive relations in the Trump presidency so far.
Yeah, but the difficulty is also, though, that Trump doesn't necessarily have his own party on board.
Well, I think he has enough of them.
And what he's doing is sort of asking a lot of his folks to potentially walk the plank before there's really can you count on the Democrats to go forward with this? And maybe you can, but my sense is historically, and just looking at where things are, if I were the Democrats, why would I take any deal with Trump?
Well, I guess, yeah. Well, I have a few other thoughts on that, but before I get to those, we should thank our first sponsors for today, Blue Bottle Coffee. I've said it before, Jay. I'm a big fan of good coffee, and really good coffee. I like in so many things. I'm so picky. I can't even tell you how many times I've actually dumped out supposedly high quality beans because they didn't come close to meeting my. I had tried out these different kind of beans just a couple weeks ago, and I was like, oh man, and they ended up in the compost heap. It was painful. So the point is when I tell you that Blue Bottle Coffee,
at least you're composting.
Well, exactly. Of course I am. I'm a liberal. What do you want? But Blue Bottle Coffee, it is. When I tell you it's seriously good stuff. This is from my I will dump out coffee that I don't think it meets my standards kind of perspective. I mean, when I got my first order, I saw that the roasted on date was just 2 days before it arrived in my mailbox, and that's really impressive. A lot of people don't appreciate how important that is, because the closer to roasting time you get with those beans, the better and fresher your coffee is going to taste. And really, it tasted exceptional. I mean, I don't ever recall having a better cup of, well, I tried some of their light roast and it was awesome. Their medium roast was also awesome as well. And Jay, you've tried it too, right?
I have, and really, it's something you notice. You notice flavors in the coffee that maybe you didn't notice before. And I'm not talking about like flavored coffee, like it's hazelnut or something else, but coffee flavors. It's something that, again, you don't really experience all the time, and yeah, you drink and say, wow, this is a little bit different experience. This is more depth than just your typical cup of joe.
Oh, without a doubt. And whether you like light roasts or dark roasts or anything in between, Blue Bottle has something for really everyone's palate. And another big plus for me, again, not only do I compost, but I'm a big fan of sustainability, and Blue Bottle works directly with farmers all over the world to source the most delicious and sustainable coffee they can find. And that's super important to me. And here we go. Blue Bottle has a great deal for Politics Guys listeners. Really, sign up for a free trial of fresh, delicious Blue Bottle coffee right now at bluebottlecoffee.com/TPG. I mean, what do you got to lose? It's a free trial. Free. That's bluebottlecoffee.com/TPG. bluebottlecoffee.com/TPG. Okay, so, back to that deal in principle or whatever we want to call it, essentially. Again, you're right. Trump's approach to this is, as usual, unorthodox. And it would have been better if he would have tried to get some people on board of his own party before that. You don't shut your own party out of the meeting. And so I see what you're saying.
Well, you go to the Democrats and you say, listen, here's what I can guarantee you from House Republicans. Here's what I've got. I've got this, they will agree to this, as opposed to going first to the other side and then trying to go to your side and say, oh, yeah, they'll agree to it. When I think there's little incentive for them to do that.
Because it sure sounds to me like you're very, very skeptical of this, I would say. Does that characterize your position?
I'm skeptical, and I'm looking historically. If you look back, there was a similar deal, and this was actually something that had escaped my memory until I read something a week ago that brought it back. In 2008, there was essentially a bill that would have included all the DACA provisions and other immigration pieces, and it looked like it was ready to go through the Senate. What happened then was Ted Kennedy passed away. He was sort of one of the architects of this, and a young senator from Illinois, Barack Obama, spoke fervently in trying to push Democrats into rejecting the deal. On the idea that they'd rather have the issue of immigration to run on in the next election. So that's, again, to me, it's if I'm Schumer and Pelosi, if I'm Pelosi, I would much rather be able to go out and campaign, do a couple things. One, campaign on the platform Trump is the devil. So we can't cut any deals with him. Two, Trump hates immigrants. So we want to, build up the Hispanic vote and other immigrant vote, and three, for Democrats to head off any potential primary challenges, which I think some of them have to be concerned about, and we'll mention that in our next story. That's why I see it as I don't see much advantage for the Democrats to actually take the Trump deal. And I'm concerned he might end up getting rolled.
So you're basically saying that Pelosi and Schumer don't give a damn about the Dreamers, and it's not about policy, and it's all. I mean, this is you are. I mean, if I understand you correctly, you are being pretty deeply cynical and just basically suggesting that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are bargaining in bad faith, or is that too extreme?
At this point, given the history, I think they. Maybe bargaining in bad faith is stating it too far, but I don't see any reason why they and their caucuses would go along with this.
Well, maybe because they actually care about Dreamers.
Let's think strategically. Again, if you are either Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi, you may care deeply about the Dreamers, but why make a deal with Trump now as opposed to make a deal with him later when perhaps you have a House majority and you can get a much better deal?
Okay, I see what you're saying.
I think is the calculus.
And that's exactly the sort of thinking that's led to the incredible gridlock and disgust with government and that sort of thing. And on this issue, I am a little less cynical than you are, and I have a little more faith in the system working. Now, we're obviously going to find out what's going to happen here before too long, because now this issue has been moved front and center, and I would expect within the next few months we'll get a much better sense of that. But I will make my bold prediction that there will be some sort of a deal that Donald Trump will sign, and it will have increased border security and some sort of status for Dreamers, and that your deeply cynical prediction will prove wrong. So we'll see who's going to be eating crow on this, I guess, and I hope it's for the sake of the country. I hope it's you, Jay. So
well, no, and I want to point out one more thing again. When you think about these things strategically, in sort of big picture, and this is something that I think a lot of people don't get, is that the House Democrat caucus, the House Republican caucus, they think in terms of caucus wide. How are we going to do on this? And Trump has put House Republicans, Senate Republicans to some extent too, but I think more so House Republicans in a real bind on this. And that's going to be
absolutely.
Again, it's difficult, and I think it's,
but not all of them, because I mean the Dreamers are very, they poll very well, and there are actually a large number of Republicans in the House and the Senate who would like to see some sort of positive outcome for the Dreamers. And if that can, now there are some hardliners like Steve King, some other folks who clearly,
no, and you're not going to get everybody, and some people will have to take a walk on this. And no, I get that, but
I mean, in the Breitbart group, right? I mean, they called him this week Amnesty Don. I mean, so clearly there's a big part of his base who's not happy at all with this. But and so in a sense, you could make the case that I'm kind of arguing a pro Donald Trump argument that he's actually taking a bit of a political risk here. He's expending some political capital to do something, and now I think he's probably doing it just so he can say he gets some kind of legislative achievement this year, and maybe he thinks this is his best shot at legislative achievement. And actually, I don't know that he's too far wrong on that, but we will see. And like I said, either way, we're going to find out within the next couple of months, I would say. So, Jay, do you go to a lot of live events?
Well, I do when I can. Not as many as I'd like, but yes, I do.
Yeah, I used to go to a lot more too, but honestly, just it sometimes it could be kind of a hassle, and including just buying tickets. I mean, it can be a pain, and this is what I love about SeatGeek. They make it better, easier, simpler to buy tickets. It's the smartest way to get tickets to live events, I think, because they have this really nice mobile experience right on your phone. You can buy and sell tickets, just 2 taps, no kidding. And they get you the best seats at the best prices. It's fully guaranteed. And if you're like me and you still like to do some stuff on a laptop, you can just go to their website, SeatGeek.com, and find out how quick and easy SeatGeek makes it to buy tickets. And the reason why they can give you such great deals is that they compare multiple ticket sites to find you the best deals, and they even grade every available ticket based on value so that you can instantly see what the best deals are for your budget. And best of all, Politics Guys listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code PoliticsGuy today. And that promo code PoliticsGuy also works if you go to SeatGeek.com. That's promo code PoliticsGuy for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. All right, Jay, so moving on from the DACA deal, there was another big bit of legislative news this week. Senator Bernie Sanders introduced what he's calling Medicare for All legislation. His proposal calls for a 4-year transition period to a single-payer healthcare system modeled on Medicare, but really it's far more generous than Medicare is because it includes no cost sharing from patients, meaning you can basically see doctors for free. And
there's no Medicare supplement like there is in the current Medicare, where people essentially would pick up more or less 20% of their own costs.
Right. No copays or any cost sharing at all. Yeah. And also the benefits are significantly expanded over what Medicare is. And so, even a few years ago, proposals like this got almost no support from congressional Democrats. But this time out, Sanders' proposal really has a number of prominent congressional supporters, including the sort of the leading the field 2020 presidential potential nominees, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Elizabeth Warren. So, I mean, there's a lot of support for this among Democrats. There's talk about the Democrats becoming the party of single payer, that sort of thing. So Jay, what do you think Bernie's up to with this?
Well, I mean, to as dismayed as I am sort of by the Trump DACA deal making and the way it's playing out, and as much as I think that hurts Republicans going forward, I think this is really Bernie is sort of luring Democrats into what may well be an untenable position down the road. So that heartens me a little bit. And that is, I mean, similar single payer plans like this have been proposed in states, and even Vermont essentially has rejected it. Vermont being Bernie Sanders' home state and one of the most liberal states in the country, and one of the states where if you were going to have a single payer type system, it would be most likely to work. And that is a small, relatively homogenous population. Relatively wealthy that can afford this kind of thing. So I think Democrats that they're digging into this. He's making it tough, and if they make this a litmus test, I think that's going to be difficult. I would say notably some folks who haven't signed on yet. One is Ohio's Sherrod Brown, who is very
kind of
much
a dark horse candidate,
a liberal, a progressive, but yet has not. So
yeah. Well, I have some problems with this. For a number of reasons. Number one, the idea that based on what I know about healthcare policy and healthcare utilization, and I've been digging into this issue for quite a long time, ever since, in fact, way back to the time where President Clinton proposed healthcare reform that crashed and burned. But if you give people so-called free healthcare, they tend to use more of it, right? And all the evidence that we have from all kinds of contexts say that it's a really bad idea to have no cost sharing. Even if there's just minimal cost sharing, that helps to keep utilization down to a reasonable level. And what a lot of other countries do who have a single payer is they impose a form of minimal cost sharing, and sometimes they even make it so that people, lower income people, it's less, whether through some kind of a credit or something like that. But no cost sharing, that to me is a recipe for disaster, basically. And I can see.
Glad to hear you say that. I've always believed that.
Well, it's just basic. It's just basic economics, right? And so, calling it Medicare for all is really misleading naming. I get why you'd want to do that. I would actually be in favor probably of a real Medicare for all, but Bernie Sanders is proposing something a lot more radical than this. I think he's doing it because, number one, he's a socialist at heart, and he actually would love to see something like this. But I think it would be a disaster financially. It would not work at all. Now, Republicans, I think, realize that this would be a disaster financially. And in fact, Republicans are the ones who are calling for a CBO score for this. And based on what we know about similar plans that have been scored, this will cost tens of trillions of dollars over the course of a decade or so. I mean, there's no
the numbers I'm looking at, and this is from a similar proposal that was floated, and this isn't the CBO score, but the Urban Institute, who you do not typically think of as being a bunch of right-wing radicals, estimated it would cost 25 trillion in the first year and 32 trillion, that's with a T, over the first decade. So again, that's a tremendous, and again, this is an all increase. Federal spending would rise by that much. This isn't something that okay, we're offsetting it by some other cost.
Well, we should say, and I think it is in a way offset. It would be offset because right now, around a little over half of people get health insurance get it through their employers, right? And so a system like this would eliminate that, which means that it would free up all that money that employers are paying right now into the system. Now, what would employers do with that money? I don't know. Maybe it would help to grow the economy. Who knows?
Mike, this is a wholesale transfer to the rich.
Well, we don't know what would happen, but also we also know that with the
I'm just saying. Again, I take your point. I think you're right. If it frees that up and there's more money that goes to a private industry, what do they do with it? I don't know. But
right? Because right now, private employers pay trillions of dollars, and so we don't know the effects of changing that system that quickly. Also, I think there's very little question that, insurance companies as middlemen in this system, they don't do what they do because out of the kindness of their heart, they make money out of it. And so if you eliminate that middleman, you also would certainly generate some cost savings and so forth. But I'm not arguing that that's nearly enough to make up for whatever, $32 trillion over a decade. But my point being is that you need to factor those things into any kind of calculation. And they're inherently difficult to do because it's such a huge change that we just don't really know what the cost savings would be or what employers would do with that money. So it's awfully speculative. And I've said this before, Jay, that I'm really uncomfortable with massive countrywide policy changes of that magnitude where so much is so speculative. So just as a matter of policy making that radical of a change, I'm not really for that. I think the Medicare model is something we're a lot more we have a lot more experience with. We have a lot better sense of how it works, and so that's the sort of thing that I would be willing to embrace. And I'm wondering if maybe Bernie Sanders, puts forward this really radical vision as kind of a opening bargaining position, basically for 2020 or beyond, with the thinking that, well, we can start from there and maybe work down to a real Medicare for all model. And that's maybe what some Democrats are thinking as well.
We'll see. But my concern, if I were a Democrat, is it's far closer to a litmus test. And there was a really kind of a funny piece I read about a week ago. I don't know whether you recall in the movie. There's something about Mary. There's a scene where Ben Stiller picks up a hitchhiker who has the idea for a video that would promote 6-minute abs. Because there's currently a product for 7-minute abs, but this would be 6 minutes, so it would be better. And Hillary Clinton sort of lamented this same thing about Bernie, is that no matter what, you can always do better. I mean, there will be other Democrats if they try to say, okay, no, we can go for a more moderate Medicare for all plan. That's not going to fly because there will always be the Bernie Sanders or someone else further to the left who will give you more, who will give you the 5-minute abs or 4-minute abs or whatever, regardless. And it's sort of some fascinating quotes from Hillary's Why I Lost book about that, lamenting that there's nothing they can do because Bernie can always get to the left of them and give away more free stuff. And I think that would be endemic and again would lead to some primary challenges if people don't sign, if they're not all in.
Sure. No, I think that's a very real possibility. And, I've raised concerns before about the extent to which the Democratic Party shifts to the left, and which I think, unfortunately makes it a lot harder to get anything done and isn't necessarily so. I mean, I'm kind of a centrist by nature, and so that disturbed me for a number of reasons, but that's a very real possibility. And I hope you're wrong about that. And not that we're going to see any kind of movement on this, certainly not before 2020. And even then I'd be kind of skeptical. But, another thing that occurs to me is that I wonder why the Democrats are focusing so much on this issue. I mean, they put an awful lot of time and effort into the whole Obamacare thing. And God knows there were so many other.
It's gone really well for them.
Well, it's still, but there are so many other issues. I mean, what about climate change? Even Bernie Sanders says climate change is the most important issue facing the United States. Or what about our crumbling infrastructure? Or what about education? I just think that there are an awful lot of issues that Democrats could maybe more profitably focus on and expect to actually get something done on, as opposed to coming back to healthcare, anyway, I think it's
I disagree with you a little bit because I think Democrats see healthcare as a kitchen table issue that can connect them with this working middle class that they've lost over the past couple elections. I think something like climate change is a concern more to coastal elites who Democrats already have. They've got no problems holding that group. The problem is, again, your working class folks who are concerned about making ends meet, and this is a better appeal to them than some of these more esoteric issues where you don't see an immediate benefit. Well,
once again, Jay, I'm going to be a little less cynical than you are, and I'm going to say that I think that there are plenty of Democrats in elected office who really care, who really want to push climate change and feel that it's the most important issue. And it's not all about positioning and winning majorities.
Oh no, and I agree. I agree that. But I'm just saying that I don't see them attracting the voters of Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, all those places with that argument as much as they would attract those voters with a healthcare argument.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. Well, maybe then, I mean, putting climate change aside, maybe like infrastructure or education, certainly, and those are broadly.
No, I think infrastructure works better again because there's a direct bang. Here's creating jobs. Education maybe is a harder sell, but yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, yeah, like I said, nothing's going to happen in the near term. I mean, I think this is a mistake for the Democratic Party, but in the final analysis, if I could wave my magic wand and maybe transition us to Medicare for all, I think I would probably do that. And you groan in dismay, I'm sure.
No. I would groan in dismay, but I'm confident that there will be someone to the left of you who, for every free pony that you would give to everyone, would promise them 2 free ponies. And I think that's what's going to be the death of this.
Yeah. You may very well be right about that. So, okay. Well, moving on, last week, credit rating agency Equifax announced a massive security breach by hackers, which affected the personal information of 143 million Americans. And that included social security numbers. And the company has come under, pretty considerable fire for waiting 6 weeks to announce the breach, offering what a lot of people say is insufficient response to the breach, and as well as for 3 top executives selling $2 million worth of company stock after they were aware of the breach, but before they went public with the news. And there are now over 100 lawsuits related to the breach. Congress is investigating, as is the FBI, the FTC, and I believe also the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So, Jay, what's your take on Equifax's actions and what, if anything, I guess, do you think the federal government should or might do in response?
What should the federal government do in response? I don't know that there's anything to the extent there are potential criminal failures or criminal activity in terms of potential insider trading. Look, obviously that's something you look at and you conduct the investigation and see where it leads. I'm not sure what we would, what would you want the federal government to do? I mean, I think obviously they should beef up security better. They didn't beef up security enough. And they're going to pay a price for it.
Well, so I have a couple of ideas.
I don't necessarily see a role for the federal government outside of the criminal prosecution here, or maybe if there are civil actions to make sure that Equifax does right in terms of remedying this, providing the free monitoring and so forth that they say they're going to do.
I think you've pointed out that the main law that covers these credit rating companies, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, this was passed in 1970, and both technology and data security issues and credit, also the nature of credit, has changed a lot in almost a half century since then. I think it's time to take another look at the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Now, currently, these credit agencies they have an obligation to take reasonable measures to secure data. But, as to what that means, that tends to be up to the regulators, and the main regulator of these agencies is the FTC, and the FTC has very limited ability to levy fines. And so what I'm saying is these agencies have become just an absolutely critical part of our financial infrastructure. And technically, they're supposed to be regulated to about the same level as banks, but they get far less oversight than banks get. And I think that needs to change. Also, I think it's important to keep in mind that, unlike companies that people sign contracts with, I never signed a contract with Equifax or Experian or TransUnion or anything like that. So, you just end up being in the database of these agencies, as opposed to with, like your cable provider or your cell phone carrier, where if they wrong you, they have these agreements and, you maybe agree to non-binding arbitration or other things like that. But this is different. We're kind of all sucked into the maw of these companies, whether we like it or not. And I think that's an important distinction here. And finally, that there are these 3 companies, they have an effective oligopoly in this area. And I think there are very understandable reasons why that's the case. And whenever you have a situation where you have a few companies who basically have a natural monopoly or oligopoly on the market, I think that calls for a different regulatory response than in instances where you can expect strong competition between competing firms to maybe take care of some of these issues. So for all those reasons, I think we need to take a look at the laws governing these agencies, the amount of oversights they get, and in light of the role they play in the modern economy, that we might want to consider making some changes.
Here's my thought in terms of if I were to come up with some sort of regulation as to what they ought to do or federal requirement. I guess the biggest thing that would strikes me is that we make sure that these organizations would carry adequate insurance, because you can insure, and this is a growing area in the law of insuring against cybersecurity risks. Because it's happened to a lot of businesses, and a lot of businesses buy this kind of insurance. Now, I imagine they probably do have some, whether it's enough to cover this magnitude of a breach. And again, this is 150 some thousand people's data in a country of 300,000, a million in a country of approximately 380 million, and you figure a lot of those are kids and who don't have credit cards and so forth. So I mean, it's probably affects about one out of every two or so people who have any kind of credit relationships. So this is big, and I guess to the extent I could see that being a reasonable type regulation. My concern with I don't know how you regulate having good cybersecurity otherwise.
No, I know what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely, and I think
it's almost more of a technical question. What do you need in place? I'm not the person to answer that, and whoever is, there's always some hacker out there who could get around it in some way. It's an evolving sort of thing. So
and that's the problem. Race. Yeah, and that's the problem with setting anything in stone in regulation, is it can't keep up. So no, I actually think that that kind of proposal you suggest isn't there's something to be said for it. It's kind of similar to the idea that instead of trying to put a whole bunch of regulations on financial institutions, you make sure that they keep a certain amount of money in reserve, and that in a lot of, so yeah, I think that's certainly a thing to look at. Another thing,
and the other reason is also therefore the prudence in which they run their industry. They can accrue a benefit. If you don't have many insurance claims, your insurance rates will be lower and you will save money. As opposed to a competitor who has a lot of claims.
Now, another problem, and this is changing a little bit, but another problem is that up until recently, it was very difficult to successfully make a claim against a company if your data was stolen because of their lack of appropriate security, because it was very difficult. It still is very difficult to show a clear connection between your credit being harmed and linking it to that data breach, by the very nature of that. Now, that's changing a little bit, and some courts are saying, well, just the very fact that your data was stolen, just the idea that it's out there, that's a harm, and there should be a remedy for that. But traditionally, for you to be able to make a successful claim against a company, you have to say, not only was I damaged, or here's how I was damaged, but here is the direct connection to what this company did or failed to do. And of course, in these cases, that is inherently difficult to almost impossible to prove.
Right. And again, it's not only that, but to what extent are these companies guarantors of your data? Typically this is something that you see a lot in what's called the law of bailments in warehouses and so forth like that. If you have whatever your goods sitting in a warehouse and somebody rips you off, now if the warehouse took all reasonable steps to protect against theft, well, there's really nothing that they did negligent. If there's a criminal mastermind who can get around their security, there's nothing that they did wrong. And that's kind of the point was trying to make there, that to the extent there are criminal masterminds, these hackers who can do this, it's difficult to envision any regulation that can outsmart them. And the best you can do is require reasonable steps.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. And I want to add to that to say that, the investigations are still in their very early stages. The FBI is doing some other organizations, but we don't really know what sort of steps Equifax took and whether or not they were reasonable. And that these kind of investigations can take quite a long period of time. And so a lot of this is just kind of, speculation at this point. But now one thing that isn't speculation is that Equifax waited a month and a half to let consumers know about this. And during the time they knew there was a breach, they were conducting businesses normal and this sort of thing. And so that, I think, is an area where we might want to look into maybe some regulation saying, within X period of time, once you find out that your security has been breached, you have a duty to alert everyone who uses your service, that kind of thing. I mean, would you agree that seems like a reasonable?
Yeah, that would seem to be not unreasonable.
Yeah. So
although I question sometimes when when do you know there's been a breach? I mean, that's where the rubber would hit the road. I mean, to me, from a legal perspective. Sometimes you could be breached and you don't know it for a while, or maybe you could have found out earlier, that sort of thing.
And the concern, and I understand a related concern, would be that if there's a requirement like that, then somebody finds out about a breach and then they cover it up and that sort of thing. And certainly that kind of thing can happen. But I think you would agree, right, that this is certainly a growing issue. Obviously, identity security, identity theft, data theft, and that the systems, the regulatory regime, the structure that we have to deal with it certainly has not kept up with the technology, and that it's certainly something that's a critical issue and worthy of a serious consideration by the federal government. Okay. All right, then. It's always nice to close on a note of, some sort of agreement there, I would say, but before we do close, it is time for What We're Reading, where we step back from, what's going on during the week and talk about, more in-depth, thoughtful things that we're reading, listening to, or watching. And so, Jay, this week, you probably know, not this week actually, but fairly recently, at the beginning of this month, one of my intellectual heroes retired. I don't actually have too many intellectual heroes. I like to think fairly high standards, but one of them is Judge Richard.
I'm hoping I'm on the list, right?
Oh, well, you're right up there.
Or at least
But anyway, one of them is Judge Richard Posner. And Judge Posner has been on the Seventh Circuit since 1981, where he was appointed by Ronald Reagan. He, in addition to being, I think, a pretty impressive judge, he's been an incredibly prolific public intellectual.
He writes like 2 books a week.
Yeah, it's insane. I think I saw a thing recently saying that he was the most cited public intellectual in like the 20th century or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, he just writes a ton of stuff. For a while, actually, he even had this great blog with the economist Gary Becker, and he's written, like Jay said, like you said, a bunch of books. Actually, 2 of them on the financial crisis and its aftermath. I've actually used them in some of my classes. And so Cass Sunstein from Harvard, who's also another one of my intellectual heroes, as it happens, wrote a great article on Posner's career. It's called Richard Posner, Leader of a Legal Revolution. And I thought it was a great sort of recap and tribute to just a truly impressive man. And I highly recommend it. And I'll make sure to put the link on our site. So, Jay, I think I don't know if you're a fan of Richard Posner or not.
I am. And actually, I'm sorry, I didn't see that and pick that as mine. Because Posner is a giant in the law, even if not the rest of the public intellectuals, and specifically in a lot of legal areas where people don't think about. I mean, again, this is commercial law stuff that he does. That he has been again sort of the guiding star. And if you ask someone to name a federal appellate court justice or a federal appellate court judge, again, someone who's not on the Supreme Court, Richard Posner is the name that most anyone would pop up with. And he truly is one of the smartest men in America, and maybe one of the smartest men, of our lifetime. So it's on the one hand, sad to see him taking senior status, but which is what they call it in the law. You don't really retire; you just take senior status. But maybe that'll free him up with more time to write and do his other stuff. So.
Yeah, that would be great. In fact, I should mention that I actually sent out an email to him asking him to come on the show and told him how much I admired him and so forth. Now he's has a lot extra
got
time.
Some time.
Yeah. Exactly. That would be, I don't know, I'd probably have to take a couple of Valium because I'd go totally fanboy on him, I think probably, but I imagine I'd get through it. Anyway, Jay, so what do you got for us this week?
All right, what I've got this week, and this is maybe cheating because it's not what I'm reading, it's like what I've read. This was a book I read a couple years ago, but the stuff this week, it just kind of brought it back to me. It's a book, and I mentioned it to you one time, and you didn't like it, but it's by Eric Larson. It's called In the Garden of the Beasts, which is the story of the U.S. ambassador to Germany in 1932-33. And gives sort of a bird's eye view of Hitler's rise to power. This is when Hitler is in government, but he's not really become Hitler as we know him yet. He's not the great dictator. He has not consolidated power over all Germany. And the reason I found this interesting was something else I read, which I want to post on the website, and I'm waiting to get permission from the author. It's a friend of mine who's a professor of medieval history. But he wrote a really just fascinating Facebook post, and kind of in the wake of Charlottesville. And I know I'm probably a couple weeks late on all this, but about fascism and white nationalism, and his essential diagnosis is, to the extent that there are white nationalists who would describe themselves as neo-Nazis, today they are nothing compared to what the actual real Nazis were. And really just some good reflection there, that the folks who backed Hitler, who were the brown shirts and were beating people up in the streets during the Weimar Republic, these were guys who were hardened war veterans. These were guys who were, again, sort of mainstream almost in the rest of their lives, but adopted this radical ideology, and did so in an environment that was permeated by anti-Semitism, which is something that we don't really have here in the U.S. And again, people can disagree with that, but I think if you look at the record and the history, I mean, it's a different animal when you're talking about European anti-Semitism. So anyway, just because there's been a lot of discussion of folks, and even some stuff on our Facebook post about, is the hard right, the alt right ascendant, and is this to the extent this is a real problem. I think this is a great book, just in terms of being historically fascinating, but also in seeing, what fascism is and how it gets started. And, one, to watch for the signs, but two, also to be a little bit, take in stride that situation is not our situation.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we will also have a link to in the Garden of Beasts on the website as well, in the show notes. So that does it for this week. Thanks everyone for listening. We hope you like what you heard and that you will check out today's sponsors. Listener support is a huge help to us, and we really appreciate it. If you are interested in joining our great group of Politics Guys supporters, you can go to politicsguys.com and click on the Patreon link. And if you care to support the show without spending anything, it would be great if you could share this episode with your friends and followers, or pass along our new show posts and tweets on Facebook and Twitter. Also, leaving reviews and ratings on iTunes does really help. If you've got a question, comment, correction, or just a random thought you want to share with us, you can reach us at mail@politicsguys.com. Our Facebook page, where you can message us and where we post throughout the week, is facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter @politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, and Bruce Johnson. The show was produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Wednesday. We hope you'll join us.